Michael Bruce Ross. I am a condemned man on Connecticut's death row. When most people think of death row inmates, I'm the type they think of. I'm the worst of the worst, a serial killer who raped and murdered 8 women in 3 different states, assaulted several other women, and stalked and frightened many more. I have never denied what I did, and have fully confessed to my crimes. The only issue in my case was, and still is, my mental condition. For years I have been trying to prove that I am suffering from a mental illness that drove me to rape and kill, and that this mental illness made me physically unable to control my actions. I have met with little success. Before moving forward, don't forget to like, share and subscribe our channel. So here I sit on death row, waiting for the judicial system to complete the tedious process, which will in all likelihood result in my eventual execution. When I am finally executed, many people will celebrate my death. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can envision the hundreds of people who will likely gather outside the prison gates on the night of my execution. I can see them waving placards, drinking and rejoicing, and I can hear their cheers as my death is officially announced. Who is Michael Ross? And what could possibly motivate a clearly intelligent individual, a Cornell University graduate, to commit such horrendous crimes? As you might expect, I have been examined by a multitude of psychiatric experts over the past 12 years, since my arrest in June 1984. All of them, including the state's own expert psychiatric witness, diagnosed me as suffering from a paraphilic mental disorder called sexual sadism. A mental illness that in the experts' words resulted in my compulsion to perpetrate violent sexual activity in a repetitive way. These experts also agreed that my criminal conduct was the direct result of uncontrollable sexual impulses that were caused by my mental illness. The state's only hope of obtaining a conviction and death sentence was to inflame the jury's passions and emotions so that they would ignore any evidence of psychological impairment. In my particular case, that was quite easy to do, and the state succeeded in obtaining convictions and multiple death sentences. I'm not sure that I fully understand paraphilic mental disorder, and I have been trying to understand what has been going on in my head for a very long time now. Basically, I was plagued by repetitive thoughts, urges and fantasies of the degradation, rape and murder of women. I couldn't get it out of my mind. These unwanted thoughts and urges filled my mind when I was awake. They were in my dreams when I slept. They were insatiable. Imagine trying to control such urges day by day, hour by hour, and try to imagine the self-hatred, loathing and abhorrence that I developed toward myself when I ultimately failed. The best way for someone who is not plagued with this problem to understand the obsessive and repetitive nature of these thoughts, urges and fantasies is to remember a time when you had a song or some catchy tune stuck in your mind, playing over and over again, driving you crazy. Even if you like the melody, its constant repetition, over and over again, becomes more than merely annoying. When this happens, the harder you try to push that melody out of your mind, the louder and more persistent it becomes, driving you almost to the point of madness. Now replace that sweet little melody with noxious thoughts of physically and mentally degrading women. Now you can begin to understand what I had running wild in my head, and that is not something that I wanted in my head. The urge to hurt women could come over me at any time, any place. Powerful, and sometimes irresistible urges that welled up for no apparent reason and with no warning. Even after my arrest, while facing capital charges, the urges continued. I remember one day being transported back to the county jail from a court appearance just prior to my trial. I was in the back of the sheriff's van in full restraints, handcuffs, leg irons, and a belly chain, when we passed a young woman walking along a wooded stretch of road. I cannot begin to adequately describe the intensity of the urges that enveloped me that day. I wanted. No, I had to get out of that van and go after her. The situation was ludicrous. There I was, in the back of the sheriff's van on my way back to jail, and all I could think about was how badly I wanted to get hold of her. Later, back in my cell, I fantasized about what would have happened had I gotten hold of her. I'm not sure that I fully understand paraphilic mental disorder, and I have been trying to understand what has been going on in my head for a very long time now. Basically, I was plagued by repetitive thoughts, urges and fantasies of the degradation, rape and murder of women. I couldn't get it out of my mind. These unwanted thoughts and urges filled my mind when I was awake. They were in my dreams when I slept. They were insatiable. Imagine trying to control such urges day by day, hour by hour, and try to imagine the self-hatred, loathing and abhorrence that I developed toward myself when I ultimately failed. The best way for someone who is not plagued with this problem to understand the obsessive and repetitive nature of these thoughts, urges and fantasies is to remember a time when you had a song or some catchy tune stuck in your mind. In the back of the sheriff's van on my way back to jail, and all I could think about was how badly I wanted to get hold of her. Later, back in my cell, I fantasized about what would have happened had I gotten hold of her. That ignorance, and its resulting guilt, is a very heavy burden on my mind, and a burden that I will carry with me for the rest of what remains of my life. Even after I was sentenced to death and living on death row, the urges persisted. One day I was being escorted from the mental health unit back to my cell after seeing my psychiatrist. I was being escorted, without restraints, by a young petite, female correctional officer. When I got to a secluded stairwell that leads from the unit back to the main corridor, I suddenly felt an overwhelming desire to hurt her. I knew that I had to get out of that stairwell, and I ran up the stairs and out into the hallway. I'll never forget how she shouted at me and threatened to write me a disciplinary report. She didn't have a clue as to what was going on. She never knew how badly I wanted to hurt her that day. She never knew how close I came to attacking her. You would think that being sentenced to death and living in a maximum security prison would curb such thoughts and urges. But this illness defies rationality. I am fortunate to have eventually found some relief, however. Almost 3 years after I came to death row, I started to receive weekly injections of an anti-androgen medication called Depo-Provera. 3 years later, after some trouble with elevated liver function levels, my treatment was switched to monthly Depo-Lupron injections, which I receive to this date. What these drugs did was significantly reduce my body's natural production of testosterone, the male sex hormone. For some reason, be it because of some abnormal biological hookup in my brain or some sort of chemical imbalance, testosterone affects my mind differently than it affects an average male. A few months after I started to receive treatment, my blood serum testosterone levels dropped below prepubescent levels. As this happened, nothing less than a miracle occurred. My obsessive thoughts, urges and fantasies began to diminish. Michael Ross was about an hour away from becoming the first inmate executed in New England in 45 years, when his lethal injection was abruptly put on hold in 2005. Ross had waived his appeals and accepted his execution. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more fascinating videos. Thanks for watching.